Great. Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We'll let folks keep logging in over the next few minutes. And thank you for joining us. This is our third online session for the AFE Student and Early Career Connections. And I see a few students that have been with us before, and then we have some new faces today as well already. So that's great. Today, we're really excited to have a team from the Missoula Fire Science Lab joining us. They're going to be sharing information about their work there and different aspects of the research and programs that the lab conducts. Before we get started, Mark's going to give us a couple of updates. And while he's doing that, if you wanted to introduce yourself in the chat, we would love to hear where you're logging in from and a little about your interest in fire or the program you're working on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Annie. Welcome, everyone. Mark Kibe here. It's great to be part of this program, and I want to welcome everyone to the Student and Early Career Connections. You know, we really want to connect with folks that are early in their careers and not sure what they want to do. There's a lot of options in fire, and we want to expose you to some of those career pathways. So today, I want to also point out that the Mentoring Futures program, which is another one of the Association for Fire Ecology's programs that's associated with all of this. It's a small program in which we try to partner up mentors with mentees that are having interests in the same sort of fire profession. That could be management, it could be ecology, it could be, you know, fire effects on pine oak juniper ecosystems. But if you're interested in this, it's going to be open for a couple more weeks. We'd encourage you all to take a look at our website and apply. We are looking for mentors and mentees, and it's a real fun program. It lasts for about a year. In the past, we've also had opportunities to take a short writing course with Dr. Steve Klein. So check out the Mentoring Futures program. Thanks. So next I want to hit on our next Student and Early Career Connections program, which is going to be on the Joint Fire Science program. This is kind of our national interagency fire science program. And so you'll be able to learn about the breadth of that program, how you might be able to put in for funding for student research, science grants, and that sort of stuff, and also some travel grants that you can get funding through them. So check that out on May 16th. And that's all on our website, on the student website part. Check it out. And next, I think we go to our feature presentation, right, Annie?
Yeah, and right before we turn it over to Thomas, if I don't know that I can change the view for you all to be the speaker view, but you can go up where it says view and then click on that and go to speaker view, and that will allow you to see, especially once we get to the parts where you're viewing what's happening in the lab, you'll be able to see the video full screen. So that'll be important to change for yourself if you need to.
Nice. And if you have ideas for these future career connections Zoom meetings for the presentations and the features, let us know. You can type that into the notes there as well. Give us some ideas for next fall. And without further ado, I want to introduce Thomas Zomba. Thomas is the Deputy Program Manager at the Missoula Fire Lab. We call it the Missoula Fire Lab, but it's the U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station, and it's quite an important place for fire research. It's really where it all started, and it's recognized internationally as one of the centers of excellence for fire science. So, Thomas, take it away. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Annie, and we really appreciate this opportunity to meet with everybody today and talk a little bit about some of the work that we do. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully everybody can see that. hopefully everybody is going to be able to see Gifford Pinchot.
Looks good.
Okay, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to give a really quick overview, very brief overview of a little bit about our lab and really bit about our history. And then we will be showing you a live burning demonstration with Dr. Mark Finney, our senior scientist and research forester. And then we will be transitioning from there to Dr. Sharon Hood, who will be talking a little bit more about some of the ecology work that we do. And then once we're finished with that, we will we'll be participating in a Q&A with all of you. So we're looking forward to that. So I want to start by showing you Gifford Pinchot and talking about, you know, he was the first chief of the Forest Service. And he, back in the day in 1905, when we were, you know, around when his time, he kept talking about the importance of Forest Service research. So I just want to emphasize that Forest Service research has always been a really big part of the Forest Service ever since the very beginning. As Mark mentioned, my name is Thomas DeZamba, the Deputy Program Manager with the Fire Fuels and Smoke Science Program with the Rocky Mountain Research Station. We are based here at the Fire Lab. Our research station is one of 7 research stations that are located within the Forest Service, along with our Washington Office Research and Development Program. We are one of the ones that is geographic in nature. Our so-called geographic region covers the 12 interior West states. We are headquartered in Fort Collins. As you can see from the image, we've got offices in pretty much most every state, from Montana and Idaho all the way down to New Mexico and Arizona. Our footprint covers 4 operational Forest Service regions: the Northern, the Intermountain, the Rocky Mountain, and the Southwestern. And while we are kind of in these geographic boundaries here, I mean, in reality, our research transcends the boundaries and really is more national and international application. We are one of 7 programs that is within the Rocky Mountain Research Station. And as you can see, there are a whole bunch of, you know, we cover the gamut when it comes to all different types of forest and rangeland research. In addition to the 7 programs, we also have the Aldo Leopold Wilderness Research Institute, which is also located here in Missoula on the campus of the University of Montana. A little bit about how we started, and there are many reasons why this facility came into being, but there's 2 that we like to emphasize. The first was the fires in 1910, also known as the Big Burn. In August of 1910, about 3.1 million acres were burned between here in Missoula and roughly Wallace, Idaho, about 110 miles to the west of us. This is really significant because the Forest Service at the time was still a young agency. It was not a very popular agency. And so this really set the tone for the Forest Service trying to really figure out how we're going to manage the land. And one of the things that ultimately came out of this burn in about 20 years later was the adoption of what's called the 10 a.m. rule, which is basically if you see a fire, it has to be out by 10 a.m. the next day. And that's what led to many decades of complete fire suppression. The other main driver for the building of this lab was the Man Gulch incident in 1949. Man Gulch is located east of Helena, Montana. And on that day, there were 15 smoke jumpers that jumped the fire over there. The fire blew up and overran them. 12 of the smoke jumpers were killed on that day, along with a 13th person who was a former smoke jumper working for the Helena National Forest. In addition to that, 2 months later, Harry Gisborne, who was the first fire researcher within the Forest Service, he came out, he insisted that he wanted to come out and figure out what was going on against his doctor's wishes. He ended up dying on the spot. in Man Gulch with a heart attack. So he's often considered the 14th victim of Man Gulch. But these two incidents really emphasized the need for research on effective firefighter safety and fire management. And that was a lot of the impetus for this facility to be to come into existence. This was one of 3 facilities that occurred around the same time. The first facility was in Macon, Georgia, and it opened in the late 1950s. It was open until the 1990s when it closed, and a lot of the operations that were still taking place there were transferred up to our facility. Our facility here at the Fire Lab was dedicated in September of 1960. And then a couple of years after that, a third facility in Riverside, California was dedicated. That is still the home of our Pacific Southwest research station. But their research portfolio has really diversified, and they don't do as much fire research as they did in the past. So really, our facility here is the only dedicated fire research facility within the Forest Service. A lot of what we did in early times was to develop a national fire danger rating system, and that happened in 1972. The driver behind that rating system in the upper left-hand corner here is the Rothermel spread equation, which Dick Rothermel published in December of 1972, I believe. And here on 50 years later, it is still the backbone of many of your fire behavior, fire spread, and fire danger systems and applications that are used throughout the entire world. There were also many other projects that were done. There was actually a cloud seeding project that was one of the early projects here. Ecologically, there's always been a study of whether fire effects on individual species like white bark pine, or landmark studies such as the White Cap Wilderness Study, which occurred just south of Missoula in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness in the early 1970s. And that was one of the first studies that really demonstrated that these ecosystems that we have are fire dependent, and we need to get more fire on the landscape to help them thrive. And it was one of the drivers that actually led to the ending of the 10 a.m. rule in the late 1970s and allowing more prescribed burning to start taking place. Today, we continue to build upon that legacy. Our program works in multiple areas. We do a lot of ecological research. Dr. Sharon Hood will talk a little bit more about some of that work that they're doing later today. We do a lot of work with fire management systems. We have updated since then the National Fire Danger Rating System to become a much more robust and more remote sensing dependent system, to where now, instead of going out and making a once-a-day measurement, we can actually forecast fire danger. We do a lot of work with wildfire risk and developing wildfire risk scenarios. We do a lot of work with fire behavior, and Dr. Finney will talk more about that. One of the things we're doing with there is looking at the fundamental physics of fire in the hopes of coming up with a new fire spread model in the near future that will be fire physics based to hopefully start replacing the Rothermel spread model. We do a lot of work with smoke emissions, whether we're characterizing the chemical composition of smoke or developing emission inventories, or doing things like work like helping EPA evaluate low-cost smoke sensors. And then we also have several what we call interdisciplinary categories that cross over into all these areas, things like climate change and meteorology, things that are usable in all of these different arenas. I know that was a really quick overview, but I do want to close with this quote from our Chief McCardle. This was at the dedication ceremony of our facility. It talks about it. There's no other structure like this lab in the entire world. This whole complex of combustion chambers, wind tunnels, radar scopes, and laboratories for physics, chemistry, meteorology, and fuels research constitute a powerful means for making progress in the big job of forest protection and management. Those words were true then, and we continue to build upon those words these days. And with that, I will end my presentation. If you want to know more about the Fire Lab, you can reach our website at www.firelab.org. I will go ahead and put that in the chat. And with that, I'm going to go turn it over to Dr. Mark Finney and in our combustion chamber.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Finney. I'm a research forester here at the Missoula Fire Lab. And most of my work concerns studying fire behavior. And what is fire behavior? Well, it's how fast fires burn, how big they get, how much they consume, basically quantifying the physical processes and properties of fires. And as Thomas's introduction suggested, we still have a long ways to go in terms of understanding the physics of fire behavior. The way we typically study fire behavior here in the laboratory situation, but as well as in the field too, is to divide up all of the component processes in fire, divide them into little pieces, separate them out, study them separately, and then bring them back together in a physical model. Now, there are three main factors in fire behavior. One is the combustion and energy release. That is the burning of the fuel and releasing energy. Some of that energy is heat. Some of that heat is transferred to other fuel particles that need to heat up and then ignite. And if they don't ignite, then the fire doesn't spread. So think of a diagram where there's three components and they're all interacting. You have combustion and energy release, heat transfer from that energy to fuel particles, and then ignition. And if that sequence succeeds, then you have a spreading fire. So what I'm going to demonstrate for you today is a spreading fire where we're burning, the fuel we're burning here is very artificial. It is made out of cardboard. And you probably already know that in the wildland fuels are very, very complicated. There's so many variations of the different size classes and the different materials, grass, shrub, litter, sticks, leaves, all that stuff. Very, very complicated. One of our challenges in research and fire behavior is to come up with fuels that are quantifiable and repeatable, so that every time we make a fuel bed and do an experiment, we know exactly what we've got from the fuel standpoint. So here we've got cardboard fuels. We design these on the computer. This is one design of cardboard fuel. We design it and print it out on a laser cutter, and then we can populate these cards onto a fuel bed like this to produce a fuel bed that is exactly the same every single time, the same density, the same height, everything. Here are a couple of other examples of fuels that we burn. This is called medium density fiberboard. This is 1/8 of an inch thick. This is medium density fiberboard that's 1/4 inch thick. So you're seeing all the different kinds of fuels, examples of them that we can put together to study fire behavior. So we're controlling the combustion and energy release part. We're controlling the heat transfer and the ignition properties of these fuels. So we can then study how it all works together. What I'm going to do now is light this little fuel bed. It's on a tilting table. This is mostly done for demonstration purposes, but we have actually collected a lot of good information on this bed regarding fire spread and how long the flaming combustion takes place here, the flame residence time. So there's a little bit of Excelsior here. This is just shredded poplar, and I'm adding a little bit of alcohol to it in order to light this. And obviously it's going to spread up the slope. What you're going to see very quickly develop here is a flame front. The flames are kind of leaning towards the uphill side. They're leaning towards the uphill part of the slope because the slope is obstructing the airflow to come into the flames from the uphill side. It can't. So all of the air comes in from down below. Another thing you're seeing here is that the flames are not completely uniform across the bed. You're seeing some peaks and troughs. So there are 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 different troughs. They're flattened areas where the flames are pushed down onto the fuel bed. The reason that is happening is because the hot flames are rising, and in order for something to rise, something has to come down to replace it. So where you're seeing a flame peak going up, something is coming down right next to it to replace that air going up. And that's what forces the flames down. You see those little depressions. Now, this is a very, very low intensity fire. But still, it's able to spread very well through the very uniform fuels, and it's mostly spreading by what we call convection. The heat transfer from the flames and from the burning part of the bed is transferred to the fuel particles upslope by convection, that is flame contact. So the hot gases are sweeping upslope and they're touching the fuel particles at the top, and that's what lights them on fire. But we can put measurements and instrumentation into a burn like this to measure convective heat transfer, to measure radiant heat fluxes. And of course, we can use high-speed video, thermal infrared cameras. We, in a laboratory situation, do lots and lots of detailed measurements to discover how all the processes fit together to produce what we call fire behavior. Yeah. Oh, the next person on the schedule here is Sharon Hood. Sharon, you can take it away.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Hi, I'm Sharon Hood. I'm a research ecologist at the Fire Lab. I'm also a board member of the Association for Fire Ecology. So really appreciate your involvement in AFE, and because you're the future professionals in fire and land management. So thanks for everything you do for the organization. At the Fire Lab, I study mostly tree mortality from fire and kind of all aspects of that, kind of around which trees die and survive related to fire, and then the ecological, ecophysiological effects of fire on those trees. I do a lot of work related to how fire and bark beetles interact on the landscape, and those are our two largest disturbances in the Western US. And then work on the silvicultural treatments and field treatments and how that affects our forest and resilience to fire. So you're here in our ecophysiology lab. This is a lab where I do a lot of research, and I share this space with Matt Jolly, who's also a research ecologist at the Fire Lab. So we have a lot of equipment here. I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the work. It doesn't lend itself as well to a demonstration as what Mark just showed you, but hopefully you can still make it a little interesting. So you've probably seen some things we call cookies or tree sections like this from maybe some of your studies or projects you've been involved with, where we can collect wood samples and accurately date exactly to the year and sometimes even the season when fires occurred to look at fire history reconstructions. So we do some of that at the lab, and then we also do a lot of collecting tree cores, but boring into the tree. And we do this on I use tree cores for a lot of different reasons. To look at not only how fire changes the growth of the trees, but also how looking at pre-fire growth, and also resin ducts, which I'll show you in a minute, how that how the tree was growing before the fire and how that may influence it, whether it survives a fire, and how well it grows after a fire, and also how fire is changing those trees' defenses and its susceptibility to bark beetles. And in the EcoPhys lab, once we collect these tree cores, we go a little deeper to study how fire is affecting the tree's physiology and what that means for its chance of surviving and recovering from the fire. So some of the things that looks like is we use our light microscopes to actually prepare slides and look at internally how the fire is changing the wood anatomy. We take a lot from a lot of our cores here. We cut each individual ring and do a lot of different grind them up, and they keep going finer and finer to where we end up with these small, almost like powder of the wood, and then we use that to extract non-structural carbohydrates to look at how fire's changing and with crown scorch, how that's changing the storage of sugars in the tree, because that's a really good indicator of how well that basically the storage a tree has to help buffer itself against future stress. So I just have a couple of slides to give you a better example. Let me share this. You want to, Audrey's to help me with this, with the logistics. So here, there. Okay, so hopefully this is just an example of one of our study sites right now that was a recent prescribed fire in Western Montana. And you can see that progression of just right after the burn to about 4 months later. And we're looking at, these are ponderosa pines, and we're looking at how crown scorch is changing potentially how well water is conducted and through the tree branches, and also that signature of crown scorch, those brown needles that you see develop, especially kind of peaks at 23 days post fire, that the visual signature of crown scorch, how that is changing the tree's ability to acquire carbohydrates. And we know like some of these trees ended up dying. So we're able to look at how the level of crown scorch affected carbohydrates, and ultimately be able to predict which trees live or die based on that. So just diving in a little deeper at the actual tree level, this is where we collect. We know these cores came from a site where they're both, you can see on the scale below that they're both about the same size, but tree size is not always a good indicator of age. So that tree on the left, these are Western larch trees, that it's about 90 years old, and that was growing in a forest where fire had been excluded. The adjacent site nearby had been thinned to try to restore some of the historical open conditions that would have occurred from frequent low severity fire. And so that tree on the right was only 10 years old. So we do, tree rings help give us a lot finer detail about forest structure and age. And if we pair that with knowledge of how fires burned on the site, it can be really informative for basically trying to decide what sort of silvicultural treatments might be appropriate for restoration. And so going even deeper, these are, I do a lot of work related to tree defenses and focusing on pines that have a lot of defenses to help ward off attacks from bark beetles. So this is drilled in. These are two cross sections of tree cores I've collected. The one on the upper left is you can see the rings so those are the growth of the tree, and then those holes here are what are the resin ducts. And resin is where resin ducts are the location of where resin is made, and that's what we're showing here on the bottom right, where this is now it's a stained, very thin slide from the tree, where those blue cells are living cells that they can produce resin, and they store the resin, and then this horizontal or radial duct is where resin can be transported to a wounding site or an attack site. And that's how the tree helps to defend itself from an attacking bark beetle. And those red cells are the tracheids and the actual, like the main wood or secondary xylem of the tree. So we know that fire can stimulate these defenses in pines and actually help the bolster a tree's resistance to bark beetle attack. And this is just our last slide, kind of the finest level we go that we're, that first slide I showed you, the prescribed burn that had the crown scorch. We are collecting branches that were from branches that had crown scorch and those that, comparing that to an unburned branches. And we're looking at these actual pitch structures, which you can see here, this stained kind of darker purple between the light blue, or is the tracheids of the wood, and these little openings here, these pits, is how water is actually flowing up through the tree from trachea to trachea, up from the roots all the way to the needles. And so these little structures here that are stained purple can help prevent, if the water column becomes too stressed and under too much pressure in the tree, it will help prevent that water column from trying to keep it from breaking throughout and spreading throughout the tree. So we're looking at have samples here to see how fire is changing, how that water is flowing through the branches and maybe contributing to parts of the branch dieback from fire. So I think I'll stop sharing. Okay, and so that's all I have here in the EcoPhys lab, and I will just sign off now and then join Mark and Thomas up in the conference room to talk a little bit about some hiring tips if you're interested in federal jobs, and also answer any questions you may have. So I'll see you in a few minutes.
Thanks, Sharon. Great stuff.
So hopefully you can hear us. We're up in our conference room. Mark and I are here. Sharon will be joining us shortly. And I know she's got a little more information to share, but we certainly would be glad to entertain any questions that anybody might have.
And you all are welcome to type the questions into the chat, or if you want to turn on your video and audio, we're a pretty small group, so you're also welcome to do that and just ask questions directly.
Before to go to that, Sharon had a little more information you wanted to share?
Yeah, I thought I'd share some tips about, especially related to seasonal hiring in the Forest Service. It can be a frustrating experience if you've ever done it. I think it's frustrating on both sides for people trying to hire you and for you to try to get a job. So one thing for you to be aware of is it's probably easiest just to sign up on USA Jobs and get the automatic notices, because they don't always tell the hiring officials or your would-be supervisors when the jobs actually get posted for seasonal jobs. So it's hard, it can be hard for me to outreach and tell people, oh, the job has just been posted, it's going to be open for 5 days, because I don't know that from our HR department. So by just signing up, that will give you the kind of the best access to what jobs are available. A tip I have learned that has really affected who I was able to hire this year or not is when you do apply for jobs, and these are seasonal positions, keep in mind that we have to, a lot of these jobs or positions are grouped with several people hiring off of them, so they can be really generic. So if you think you might be interested in a job, go ahead and apply for it, because you can make the decision about whether to take it if once it's offered to you. because it's kind of impossible to know the details about the job, the way that they are advertised on USA Jobs, unfortunately. So that's where some of the vagueness can be really frustrating, because you don't really know until you get to the interview what type of position it actually is. When if you have any flexibility at all about the location, even if you think it's a long shot, like you're hoping for a certain location, but maybe you would consider another one, and it might not even be listed on the posting. If you click the box location negotiable, that will allow people that even might not necessarily be hiring from the actual it's called a job certification. So when I get a list of the people that have applied for the job, and say go through that list, and either there's not good candidates or those people have already taken a job, I can request to hire off another job position, but I can only do that if someone, we're in Missoula, if someone has clicked Missoula or location negotiable. So if you click location negotiable, it just opens up your options for things, because there's all sorts of things that can go wrong along the hiring process, and it just will, it can help help keep your options open. I would highly recommend you just contact your if there is a hiring manager or any sort of a name associated with the posting, to contact that person. It's it really helps distinguish you from the whole applicant pool. As supervisors want to kind of know that people are interested in the job, so you can just reach out by email, and it just kind of gives you a little, or can often give you a leg up to if we might have 100 or 150 applicants sometimes for a position. And then I guess I would just say lastly, like, again, like, if you are interested in a job, go ahead and apply for it. Like I said, don't worry so much about if you're, I mean, if you are qualified, of course, or if, you know, you meet the, you know, I'm not talking about the long shot positions, but, you know, go ahead and, you know, if you think you meet the minimum requirements for a job, go ahead and apply for it and see what happens, because you certainly won't get the job if you don't apply for it. So there's little risk in, you know, in putting yourself out there and gaining experience. It also helps you get familiar with the hiring process and see if, you know, for the next time when, you know, the perfect job you really want comes along, you might have, each time you can be strengthening your application. So those are just some general tips I have that hopefully can help lead to a position with the Forest Service if you're interested.
Excellent tips there, Sharon. Thank you. I was talking to my 23-year-old son about some similar stuff, looking at the jobs he was applying to, because he was pretty intimidated by the long list of experience they were looking at and stuff.
Yeah.
So
oh, one last thing I think I forgot, probably maybe the most important thing, is that these positions these openings start incredibly early. So like the positions that I'm hiring for this summer that start in May, those people applied, those jobs came open in July, late July, August of last year. So it is insanely and embarrassingly early that we ask people to apply for jobs. So and it can be really hard. You're students, you don't know what kind of where you might be the next year. But that's, again, all the more reason just to apply for jobs and get those notices on USA Jobs so that you don't miss them, because it's crazy early. And that's it, yeah. So sorry, Mark. So yeah, I think we can, any questions people have.
What was your first seasonal job, Sharon?
Actually, I didn't have a first seasonal job. I was hired on as a term forester in 2001 here at the lab.
Wow. Nice. How about Mark or Thomas? How'd you start in college?
I was 19 years old and applied for a firefighter position with the Bureau of Land Management in Colorado. And I got that position, and I came back 2 more seasons. So I had 3 seasons with the Bureau of Land Management fighting fire. My first jobs. Yep.
My background is chemistry, and I'm the late bloomer to the Forest Service. I've only been with the agency for about the latter half of my career. I've been with the Fire Lab since 2016, but before that, my whole career was air quality, working with EPA, and also as a regional program manager here with the Forest Service here in Missoula, and also back with the state of South Carolina, which is where I got started.
Anybody have any other questions related to the Missoula Fire Lab? Anything about the presentations or potential future jobs?
And again, I'd highly encourage people. I mean, we barely scratched the surface here of what we have. So many things that are going on here. Again, I'll encourage you to go to our website, firelab.org, and you can get a really good idea of some more of our facilities and the people that work here and all the different types of research that we are doing right now.
Great. And a lot of these jobs, you find on USA Jobs, you do have to look well in advance. A lot of the seasonal jobs are flown in the winter time. I used to love to look at different places. I was planning my next place I wanted to move to for the summer. I was looking at, I'd search under Alaska or California or, different places in the West I moved around to. I'm seeing some new faces out there, and I know some of you guys have some questions. George, did you have something you wanted to ask, please?
Yes, sir. Please, my name is George, and I'm a graduate student at Texas Tech University. Yeah, I'm pursuing my PhD under the supervision of Dr. Nathan Gill. And my dissertation is geared towards modeling wildfire behavior. So I would like to know if there is an opportunity that I could just get in touch or in contact with either Mark Finney or Mark Hughes, so that they could be part of my external committee members for my impending research dissertation that I'm doing here at Texas Tech University.
Yeah, sure. George, be happy to start communicating with you about your interests in fire behavior.
Yeah.
Be happy to do that.
Thank you, sir. Because I'm using FlamMap 6.2 to model wildfire behaviors in my study area at Lincoln National Forest in New Mexico.
Okay.
Currently, the land managers are performing restoration activities, specifically on aspen. So I would like to model wildfire behavior before the restoration activities and after restoration activities, just to know how effective their restoration activities are and the impact that they do have on wildfire. So I'm using FlamMap, so I'll be glad to get in contact with either Mark Finney or Charles then.
We'll be glad to talk. We'll be glad to talk about your project with you, George.
Great. And I'm currently putting together my dissertation proposal. And if you wouldn't mind, I would love to, when I'm done, I would love to share the dissertation proposal too with you so that you can have a look at it and maybe we can go from there.
Okay. Yeah, great.
Thanks.
Sounds fascinating, George. What university did you say you were studying at?
Texas Tech University.
Texas State.
Yes, sir.
Where is that located? Is that
Lubbock, Texas.
Okay, of course. West Texas. I should have known that. I'm in Albuquerque myself, so it's
Oh,
great to hear that you're doing some research on the Lincoln.
yeah.
They have a lot of fuel accumulation down there, as you know.
We have a
Great.
question in the chat from Joshua wondering if there's any remote work ever available.
The answer is yes, there is. There are some positions. Typically, if you go into USA Jobs, it'll say something, it's not location negotiable after selection, but it will indicate whether a position is remote or not. And we do have some opportunities, we do have number of people that actually do work remotely for us.
Great, thanks. Then another question that's come in the chat, going off of George's question, wondering what kind of modeling software do you typically use?
Currently, I'm using FlowMap 6.2. Yeah, that's the updated version of the 6.1. That is what I'm using now.
And then, James, I'm not sure if you were wanting to ask the folks at the Fire Lab about their modeling software as well.
I think the modeling that I'm using right now, the software that I'm using now, I think it incorporates with Farsight too as well. So it's like, yeah, and the father of FlowMap happens to be Farsight, so it's incorporated into the FlowMap. So that is basically what I'm using now to model wildfire's behavior.
So I
And Mark,
guess,
Finney, what I think they're asking you too, what you guys use.
yeah,
James West.
so depends on what part of our research we're conducting. A lot of the analysis, we write our own code for that. We write a lot of different analyses in R, in Python, in C++, developing models with different software. Most of our analysis is done with custom software, although we do use common statistical packages as well. But for example, image processing for high-speed video or for thermal infrared video, usually there's very, very specific software that works with those cameras that we use for analysis. So software is anything and everything we use for the research. We write our own, but we also use all sorts of other commercial software for that.
It also seems like a big part of what most of the scientists at the Fire Lab do is have different modeling applications like Mark's Farsight and FlamMap, and we have others. Well, Behave was developed at the Fire Lab, the FOFM, the first order fire effects model. So even those systems are constantly being worked on to try to improve them and develop new, expand their capacity and also evaluate their accuracy to try to build better models in the background. And so those are as we update the versions of those software systems. There's all that kind of background research, like Mark says, where we are using or writing our own code and testing different models for that ultimately get incorporated into the existing systems.
Thanks, Sharon. Does anybody else have any questions you want to enter into the chat or just turn on your mic and ask?
There's one in the chat. What are your predictions for the 23 fire season?
You take that, Mark.
You have to be careful about predictions, especially about the future, to quote Yogi Berra. I don't make predictions. The fact is that fire occurrence and fire growth are dependent on conditions that can change very, very rapidly. So it's not really correlated very well with very many variables, you know, of precipitation and other things. If it gets dry and quits raining, about any time during the summer, you can have big fire. So, and plus there's the ignition sources, right? We don't, it's not just lightning fires, human caused fires, and there's no way to predict any of that.
Good answer. What about the Southwest? No, just kidding. All right.
Well, then, I'll just say one more thing on that, is that one thing that is for sure, that we will have wildfires, whether it's this year or the next year or the year after, or in the next decade, we will have fires, and we'll probably have more and more severe conditions because of climate change. And so getting out there and managing the land in an ecologically sustainable way is probably the only way we're going to be able to perpetuate our forests and maintain our wildlands in the face of these kinds of threats. So even if it's a very mild season, especially if it's a mild season, that means we should take advantage of it to get a lot more prescribed burning done, a lot more management, because we know there are other years that are coming that are going to be a lot more extreme. And the more work we get on the ground, the more we're going to be resilient to those kinds of fire impacts.
Well, that was almost a closing address right there. Excellent.
Hey, this is Joshua Shanto again. I might have missed it during the first little presentation, but I was curious if the Fire Lab was specifically focused on Western US forests, and also kind of going back to the modeling questions, is there any kind of progress, or does the Fire Lab work on modeling, any modeling for prescribed fire versus wildfire?
Well, I'll take the first part of it, which is that, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think I am. When the lab was originally built in 1960, part of the mission, you know, I mentioned the National Fire Danger Rating System, but part of the mission was to actually look at fire and focus on this particular region, the Northern Rockies, you know, Pacific Northwest, this area. And part of that was because we did have 2 other facilities at that time to look at other areas. But now, again, now as things have gone on, and we are pretty much the only dedicated fire research facility within the Forest Service. Nowadays, our work is much more national in scope, international in scope. So we cover pretty much the entire country and work with many people across the world.
Yeah, I would say that that's exactly right. All of the scientists here and a number of the staff are involved in a lot of international projects with international collaborators. I myself am going to New Zealand here in about a week with the team because we have a long-standing collaboration with them. And this Sharon does too with different people. So it's very common. We don't just focus on the Northern Rockies or the United States forest, although we do work on those, I mean, for sure. But our work is international in scope. There's no question about it. And so we have a lot of international cooperators.
Yeah, just wrapped up a large project in California and have collaborators in Florida looking at prescribed burning. I've been worked with people in Turkey about some fire effects, and currently have collaborations and in Canada and Mexico as well. Yeah, about the second question about if we use any of the modeling for prescribed fire applications, the answer to that is definitely yes. I work a lot with FOFM, the first order fire effects model, and that predicts tree mortality and also fuel consumption and emissions. And so that can be used, and it's probably its main focus is used for prescribed burning mostly. I can talk mostly about the tree mortality module. Part of it is looking at what sort of burn prescription you might have that you implement to achieve your mortality related objectives. Make sure you're not gonna kill the trees you want to keep, or it's oftentimes we're trying to kill some of the smaller trees and ladder fuels to try to achieve an intensity that allows you to kill those trees without killing your overstory. So that's one big prescribed fire application. Where Russ Parsons at the lab works with with fire tech and WFDS, some of the fluid dynamics physics-based models to try to and look at improve those for prescribed fire applications too. I know, Mark, you stuff.
Yeah, I mean, all of the fire physics doesn't really care whether it's a prescribed fire or wildfire, right? All of the different environmental conditions, if you can specify those carefully enough, then it would the physical models and processes apply to both kinds of contexts. So obviously, in a prescribed fire situation, humans are doing the ignitions with very complicated ignition patterns, for example. But still the physical processes that produce fire spread and behavior are identical. Doesn't really matter. So our hope, of course, is that all of the work that we do here applies equally to wildfires as well as prescribed fires. But I think the prescribed burning is probably more important, just because that's where all the decision space is. On wildfires, there's a lot less decision space as to what management actions can be implemented, what's the latitude for public acceptance of different kinds of responses. But in prescribed burning, whether that's traditional, fairly small scale, intensive applications, or in the future, very broad scale, tens of thousands of acres, we have a lot of latitude for making decisions and choosing how we're going to get things done, and aiming for certain fire effects that we want. I mean, that's kind of the whole point, right? Is to get changes in fuel complex, changes in the fire effects, so these ecosystems are sustained by those fires. And traditionally we haven't had the emphasis on prescribed burning in the Forest Service like we should, in the West anyway. And that really needs to change. And hopefully, as that changes, we're able to keep up with that from a research standpoint and tools to support it.
That's great. Thank you.
Mark, this is Brandon Harvey. I wanted to ask a question too. Would you have any openings for research assistants going to New Zealand?
Little late, Brandon, but
Okay.
I appreciate your interest.
Yeah, I went over there once in 2007 and got to see, most of the 2 islands. And then in 2018, we had a guy come over and I taught him how to be a task force leader. So I have some ties with the Kiwis too. So I'm very jealous that you get to go down there, and everything you said has been spot on for what we're going for. So I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Good, Brandon. Well, if you're ever out here for a visit, make sure you give Sharon and I and Thomas a jingle, and we'll give you a tour. And that goes for everybody on the call, of course.
Thank you.
Great questions. Thanks, everyone. I think we're going to wrap it up. Want to thank Mark and Sharon and Thomas for your time today. Really informative presentation. You all have a great week, and make sure you tune in to our next Career Connections. It's going to be May 16th with the Joint Fire Science Program. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.